Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Trumpeter 1/700th scale Bismarck, or as the box calls it, Germany Bismarck Battleship 1941, which I find kind of funny. On the back of the box we see, well, nothing. At least the front of the box has some cool artwork. It is my hope that this kit is at least a little bit better than the frankly awful Airfix Bismarck kit that I once tried to build. I believe I've mentioned that many times. It was pretty bad. Anyway, the sides of the box show a warning that this is in fact not a toy, and a side and top-down image of the ship which serves as a painting example. Inside the box are a bunch of sprues all wrapped in plastic. I'll show a quick, not at all in-depth look at these because otherwise we'll be here all day. These sprues are labelled A through F, though there is no D sprue, so you won't be getting the D from this kit. The D, get it? The parts look, for the most part, fairly neat, though there are definitely mould lines, some of which are quite severe, at least in comparison to the size of the parts, some of which are very, very small. But other than that, I can't really see any issues with the parts while they're on the sprues. The plastic this kit is made from is pretty soft, so the best advice I can give is to be really careful when clipping parts from the sprue and removing mould lines. The instruction booklet is about what I would expect from a kit like this. It's adequate, though there are some parts in it that I found a little bit confusing. Nothing to prevent me from finishing the model though. There's a painting guide in the back which some might find helpful. I have no idea what brand of paint this references though. And of course there's a set of decals. These look okay, but having never used this brand of decal, I can't speak to their quality. But they're probably fine. Let's start putting this together. First, the instructions suggest making holes in these 4 locations. There are guide holes pre-drilled most of the way through the hull for this. I'm not really sure why these aren't pre-drilled, though maybe the parts in this kit can also be used to make a Tirpitz and that model maybe doesn't have anything mounted there. I drill the holes but don't widen them until I'm sure something will need to be attached there, just in case I have to fill them back in again later. Then I glue the forward deck into place, making sure to add some glue under this turret mount to add extra strength. I slot the deck in under that mount and it goes into place easily enough. Initially, despite the gap in the decking where the 2 sections meet, I thought this was a good fit, but then I saw this mess here in the anchor well, or whatever you would call that, which looks really bad. I roughly clean it up with my knife and then tidy it up a little bit more with a round file. This isn't especially hard, though the result is still less than pleasing. I will fill this in with green stuff later. I don't do that at the start of the build because it's better to mix up one batch of putty and fix multiple areas than it is to keep mixing putty multiple times. Then the rear deck is glued in much the same way as the forward deck. The fit down this end is much better than the forward end. I guess that's because there are no cutaways for anchors that we need to worry about down this end. I then take these 3 parts and glue them to the sides of the lowest level of the superstructure on the left side here. Or I guess I should be using ship terms, the port side. I start with the part closest to the stern. I apply pressure to this to try and eliminate the gaps as much as I can, but there's still quite an obvious one around the top and I'm not sure if that's meant to be there. It could surely be worse though, and it does look fine from the side. Next, the section amidships. Again, same deal. I used my knife to apply pressure here because my finger just wouldn't fit into the corner. And then, unsurprisingly, the forward section. This one fits the best of all 3 so far, but the gap still persists. I glued on the corresponding parts on the starboard side with similar results. I'm not entirely happy with those gaps, and I'm sure they're not meant to be there, but of course it could be worse. At this point I was kind of getting worried that this was going to be a big gappy mess, but I brave it and move on. I glue on this, what I figure might be called a gun emplacement. Whatever it is, it fits easily into place here towards the stern. There's another different gun emplacement thing towards the bow too. I had to apply a little pressure to this to get it into place, but it does fit. I then install these rails. They're not catapults, but whatever these things are, they will hold the float planes later. I don't think it really matters which side you have the extended one on, but I've attached it as the instructions suggest on the starboard side. I did have to apply some pressure to get these into place, but it wasn't particularly difficult. Next, the instructions tell me to build a couple of gun turrets, but I can see over the page it tells me to build more, so I figure I might as well build them all at once. I start with the forward 380mm, I believe, gun turret. This is easy, just make sure you have the gun the right way up like so, and then it's simply a matter of gluing both guns into the obvious location at the front of the turret. I'm not sure if both guns could elevate independently, they probably could, but I've tried to get them positioned as close to each other as I could. Then come the other 3 main gun turrets. These take slightly more work, they have a protrusion on either side that must be glued on. You can kind of see one side is rounded, this goes towards the rear of the turret. The side with an angle in it is the side that glues into the turret. Be careful with this because the parts are different for either side of the turret. I believe these are sights for firing these guns independently of the ship's fire control systems. I very well could be wrong on that though. Maybe they're just for decoration. Then, same as before, glue the guns up the right way into the front of the turret, and they're done. Next, I build the smaller turrets. I believe these mounted 150mm guns. These are just as easy as the first main turret. Just glue the guns into the front of the turret like so. I make 4 of these, and another 2 with these protrusions. These go together the same way as the first 4. These 2 turret bodies were much messier than the ones without the protrusions, and I had to clean them up a fair bit. They still look a little bit bad. I assume this is a moulding issue caused by the 2 protrusions being moulded on instead of separate parts. Not really a big issue to me though. Next, I assemble what I assume to be flak batteries. The guns go into the turrets quite easily with the large rounded protrusion facing downward like so. The fit is a little bit tight, so you might need to apply some pressure, but be careful. These guns are tiny and could break very easily. I make 4 like this, and then another 4 with different turret and gun parts. Put these together by slotting the guns in through the back of the turret. It's a little bit fiddly, but not too difficult. As before, be careful with the small parts. You don't want to break them, because then you would have to explain to the captain why they're inoperable and you'll probably get keel hauled, and that's never fun. After all that, we have this lovely pile of turrets. I don't put these onto the ship right away because I think they'll probably get bumped and damaged, so they can wait until after the superstructure is in place. Next, I could glue the anchors in place here, but I want to fill those gaps in the anchor well thingies, whatever they are, so the anchors can wait until that's done. You can see how they might be an impediment to the application of putty. Moving on, I install these anchor chain pulley things. I believe that's the technical term. These simply slot into the holes here. Next comes this pole. It goes on the very front of the ship here. I make sure it's as straight vertically as I can get it. I was really worried this would get snapped off, but it didn't. Not yet anyway. Next, I install some of these stubby looking guns. I don't know what these are. I apply glue to the base of this tiny little thing to try and avoid making too much mess. Using tweezers is a really good idea for this. I install the gun here, beside this shieldy thing next to the second forward turret. There's an identical gun that goes on the other side of the ship. Next, 2 of these tiny little rings need to be installed over the top of 2 of the holes I drilled earlier. I gently widen the drilled holes with my knife, so whatever gets installed here will actually fit. And then I glue the ring on, carefully positioning it over the hole. I suspect the reason for this is maybe the Tirpitz didn't have anything mounted here, otherwise I think it probably would have been moulded in place. Then I put 2 sets of presumably anti-air guns in this set of nesty things towards the front of the hull. These are fiddly and hard to remove mould lines from without damaging them, but they're not especially difficult to place. They are 2 different parts though, so be careful to choose the correct part for either side. Then, to the stern area where I install this anchor. This is easy. I nudge it around so that it's not up against the edges of its opening. Next, I install a flagpole, or I assume it's a pole for flags anyway. I wasn't sure if I glued it on at the right angle or not. Then come 2 more of these tiny guns, easy enough to install. Then another set of guns in the rear emplacements. Position them whichever way you like, though probably out away from the ship is best. Don't forget they are 2 different parts, though I'm not actually sure how much of a difference it makes really. Next, the instructions tell us to make a couple more sub-assemblies. First, I assemble these, I don't know, radar dome things? Whatever they are, I make 2 of them. They are keyed, but the parts don't quite line up properly. Next, I make a couple of things that I assume have to do with radar. These were fairly easy to put together. The parts are keyed so you can easily figure out their position, though I wasn't entirely sure if I'd put the grid parts on the right way up or not. It was quite hard to clean up the main parts of these, especially the bars that come out of the sides. I felt like I was going to break them off the whole time I was removing the mold lines. One of these has an antenna sticking out of the top, so don't forget that. It will help you differentiate these assemblies when you need them later. Then I build two of what seem to be quad gun mounts of some kind. These parts are tiny and very fiddly to assemble. There seems to be a lot of spare parts for these, which is good. You may find it easier to glue one pair of gun barrels on, leave it to dry, and then glue the other pair on later. I'm glad I only had to make two of these. I then assembled some more superstructure parts. The instructions say to assemble this set of walls before attaching the roof part. I found it made sense to use the roof part as a kind of guide to ensure the parts were properly aligned, or as close to properly aligned as I could get them. I glued all of the wall parts together first without sticking them to the roof parts. I did this so when I glue the roof on, applying pressure to the parts wouldn't cause the walls to separate. I glued the roof part on and applied pressure, trying to minimize gaps. Unfortunately, there are still some gaps. Next comes the front wall panel. This doesn't really fit very well at all, but I guess that means it fits in with the rest of this piece of the superstructure at least. Not the best fit. Moving on, I glue on this pair of what I think are walkways. I didn't really have an issue with getting these to fit. Then I install these side panel things. These look like they might be deflectors for air vents or something like that. I don't know. The tabs on these were very helpful in getting these properly into place. They actually fit surprisingly well. I then assemble the next level up. This is, again, like the first level of superstructure, gluing side panels onto a core part. The sides and rear fit well enough, though I did have to apply pressure to make them fit. The front panel, again, didn't fit very well. It looked pretty messy. Fortunately, I was able to fix it with my knife and it ended up looking a lot neater. I then glued that assembly onto the lower superstructure section. There's a raised guide to help you position this correctly. Unfortunately, there's a lot of gaps, so it does look a little bit messy, but it's not too bad unless you look closely. Onto this assembly I glue two more small guns. You can see at some point that I've bent the walkway thing on the starboard side of this assembly. Be careful not to bump the parts and bend them. Many of them are quite fragile. I then glue on this radar thing, whatever it's called. This is the one without the antenna on top. I followed that with these two dome things. Maybe they also have something to do with the radar. I don't know. They go on here though, with those nub things facing out towards the sides. Then I put together more sub-assemblies. First, this ring of wall, or I guess bulkhead since this is a ship. This is keyed, but make sure you glue the parts together the correct way up. The windows in the doors should give you a hint as to which way is up. Then another not quite ring-shaped ring of bulkhead. This is keyed too, but should be much easier to tell if you're gluing the two halves of this together wrong. I then add two sets of guns to this deck part, which doesn't seem to have any exterior detailing to add to it. Both of these guns are the same, unlike earlier instances with similar guns. Looks very shooty. Next, I build this. I guess it's the bridge? Maybe not. It's a little room of some kind. In the two circular emplacements to either side of it go these two T-shaped things. I have no idea what they are, but I positioned them in the way the instructions suggest. Maybe they're binoculars or some other vision device. Moving on, I glue a searchlight onto the forward part of this little platform. The thin bits sticking out of this part look like they could be scrap bits of sprue, but they're not, so don't clip them off like I almost did. The quad gun mount assemblies can then be glued into the two remaining holes. That entire assembly can then be glued to the front of the larger ring of bulkhead we just built. I'm not sure I had the platform attached at quite the right angle. There was a fair bit of play in the parts. Next, the other ring of bulkhead that almost sounds like a mystical ring of some sort with magical powers. Anyway, it goes into place on this part here. On top of that, I glue what I've assumed to be the bridge, applying pressure to try and form a gap-free bond. And on top of that goes the part with the platform with the spotlight and quad gun mounts. The fit on all of these assemblies is a little bit loose, so some effort is required to make sure the stack stands straight and isn't all lopsided and crazy looking. Then I attach what to my mind looks a little bit like a hat made from deck. That's silly. That whole assembly can then be glued onto this section of the superstructure using the handy dandy guide square. It fits into place well enough. Then the radar thing with the antenna on it goes on top of this stack of assemblies. Of course, make sure it's nice and straight. Next, it gets a mast, because masts are fun. Be very careful scraping mold lines off this part, it's quite fragile. I tried to get it on as straight as I could, but it did end up just a little bit wonky. I then sit that entire assembly in place on the hull. I didn't want to glue it down at this point because I wasn't sure if it might get in the way later, and I might decide to paint all of these sub-assemblies separately. Next, I glue the two halves of the exhaust stack together. Nothing too tricky here. The parts are keyed for your convenience. I found a need to apply pressure here for a while so the parts would bond with as little gap as possible. After that's solidly joined together, I add the top grille thing. This is keyed so you can't put it on backwards like a dingus, and it fits pretty well. There's a little bit of a gap there, but nothing extreme. Following that, I slot this platform onto the rear of the stack here. That's super easy. Next, I glue these rounded things on. The instructions said it was optional to use this, or I could have made a folded down version that revealed a spotlight behind it. I chose this one because it would be easier and look neater. Make sure to align the upper half of the support brackets on the part with those moulded into the stack parts. Next comes this brackety part. This isn't hard to position, but you should keep in mind that it will act as the lower support for the plane cranes. That's what I'm calling them anyway. So this part does need to be relatively in line with the upper platform. I didn't realise that at the time, and I put the crane parts on fairly sloppily. With a little bit of fiddling, I got them to look somewhat straight and neat. This was mostly because the glue holding the lower platform in place hadn't completely set yet, and so it was still flexible enough to be manipulated easily. With things like this, sometimes you've just got to be quick. Then, I add two spotlights that have no cover. I'm not really sure why they would have two inside a fancy cover like that, but maybe it's something else under there and the instructions are lying to me. I then install another pair of these tiny guns, easy enough to do with tweezers. And that's the exhaust stack section complete. I sit it in place on the hull, and then it's time to build some tiny little plane hangars. Or at least that's what I think these are. I make two of these. They are comprised of different pieces for either side of the ship, but the construction is the same. Just make sure you choose the correct parts. They do go together relatively easy, though they're still a little bit fiddly and not without some gaps. They kind of look like little Monopoly houses or something. I then glue together two of these little boats. This is just about as simple as it looks. Those two boats and several more are glued to the tops of the little plane shacks. There's nothing to really guide these, and it was more fiddly than I had expected. The boats don't really sit completely on the cradles that hold them, and I wasn't sure how far forward on those cradles they should go. I just ended up nudging them about until they looked okay. Yo dog, I put a boat on your boat so you can boat while you boat. The third boat that stacks on top of one of the other boats was probably the most fiddly of all. It looks like it's meant to be sitting upright, but there's nothing to really hold it there. Eventually I got it looking close enough to acceptable, and that's another section complete and placed on the hull. Now to build the final section of superstructure. The walls fit onto this core piece a lot better than they did on the forward sections, but again, the fit is definitely not perfect at all, and there are some gaps, most notably at the rear of the assembly despite my application of pressure to prevent this. The other end fit together much nicer. I think those are meant to be doors. Maybe that's where they keep the planes instead of in the little shacks. Who knows? Someone, I guess. I then glue more walls onto another core piece. These fit together pretty nicely. I wish all of the earlier ones fit this well. I wasn't sure which way up this piece with all of the bumps on it should go. I couldn't tell from the instructions. I figured it probably doesn't matter all that much and put it on however I happen to be holding it. Then, that assembly can be glued onto the previous assembly. As you can see, I was applying pressure to prevent gaps. Next, this platformy part goes onto this rectangle section. Very technical terms, I know. There's a couple of helpful guide pins on the bottom here to help with positioning. Then, I take another platformy looking part and glue some legs to it. This is fairly easy. There's keying to help with correct positioning. All you really have to do is make sure you've got the legs on it close to a 90-degree angle. Not too hard at all. It can then be glued onto the chunk of superstructure we just assembled. There are some dents for the legs to rest in, which is rather handy. This would be kind of tricky without those. Next, I take this round, nesty thing that looks a little bit like a Lego piece and I glue in a T-shaped thing. It goes together easily, like so. I make 2 of these, then I glue them into position on the top of these 2 cylindrical shapes, like so. I'm not sure, but I think these might be sets of binoculars of some kind. I don't know if they need to be pointed in the way that I've mounted them, but that's how the instructions illustrated it, so that's what I did. I follow this with another 4 of these small singular guns. This ship sure does have a lot of these. And now, probably not surprisingly, more guns. This time, mounts with 2 guns, 1 for each side. Next, some not guns. I glue 2 spotlights on this platform here. I then assemble another one of these radar things, if they are in fact radar things. This one goes together much like the other 2 I put together earlier, though this one has a small mast of some kind on top of it. That assembly can then be glued into place on the superstructure here. Make sure it's on straight and not tilted at some bizarre angle. Then I assemble a much bigger mast. This was actually quite a pain in the arse. I glue this crow's nest thing to the lower half of the mast. Despite the keying, it's hard to tell if I've got the crow's nest on straight. Then I attach this protrusion of some kind. There's an indent to guide the positioning of whatever this thing is. There's more to this mast, but I figure instead of trying to glue it all together and then installing it onto the superstructure as one unit, it would be easier and end up looking better if I were to glue on the lower half first, allow it to set, and then glue the upper part on. And so that's what I did. I then glue in this set of 2 poles strapped together. These go into place very easily and should give the mast a bit of extra strength. I then glue the upper part of the mast into place. I had to fiddle with this for a while until it was standing vertically by itself, and then I left it to dry. This is the sort of thing where parts need to be left for the glue to set for a while before adding extra parts, so you're not constantly knocking other parts out of place. When the glue on the main section of mast had set, I added this angled section. I broke the longer central beam on this part when removing it from the sprue. That was pretty annoying, so definitely be careful when removing these parts from the sprue, especially the thin ones. I think this mast assembly might be a contender for most annoying moment building this kit. I then move on to something easy. I construct 4 of these little boats. These are different to the 2-part boats I put together earlier, but just as easy to build. I then glue them to the top of this section of superstructure. There are cradles for 2 of them on either side. The other 2 go on the flat part on either side of the mast. And with that, another chunk of the ship is completed, but not glued into place just yet. Next, it's time for some cranes. These seem relatively simple to put together, but they were more fiddly than I had anticipated. Mostly because I wanted to get it all together before the glue was completely set, so I could adjust the angle the crane arm was at. I think I got the angle about right. There's no guide for it. I suppose it doesn't really matter, you could really position it anywhere, which isn't a bad thing. I let the rest of the crane set for a while before trying to glue the hook part on, because obviously I don't want to inadvertently bump the parts out of place. I don't think it matters, but the instructions show the pointy part of the hook facing inwards, towards the body of the crane, so that's what I've done. The cranes are positioned amidships here in one of the holes I had to drill out. Next, I make 2 of these lifeboats on their hoist things. It says to build these separately and then glue them on later, but I think that would make it really hard to get the angle of the arms right, so I tried to glue these to the hull before the glue was completely set to allow for some flexibility in the positioning. This was almost infuriating. The parts don't have a firm enough fit that they will stay together with friction, and so they slip out of place very easily. Also, there are no stops or anything like that to prevent the hoist parts from sliding way down inside the hull. It makes it very hard to get everything at the right angle at once. After a lot of fiddling, I think I got them looking reasonable enough. The video doesn't get across just how fiddly and annoying this was. Then I build a float plane by simply attaching its floats like so. This was a nice change from the previous step. Very easy. I then glue it into place here. There's nothing to mount it to the rail thing that it's meant to be sitting on, so I had to glue the floats to the deck. Also, I probably should have glued it to the other rail, the one that's not extended. There are 2 of these planes, so both ends of the rail thing could be occupied, or none if you would prefer that. Moving below the waterline, I attach the central propeller screw. This was a very tight fit, that's a bit unusual on this kit. Not that I'm complaining. I then glue on the propeller shafts, making sure to attach the correct part to the correct side. The longer leg should be on the outside. These go into place nicely. Next, unsurprisingly, I attach the propellers to the propeller shafts. Who would have thought? These are a different part to the central propeller, so be sure to select the correct parts, otherwise you'll look like a right ninny with the wrong propellers. Then, to ensure good steering capability, I attach both rudders. It's a little bit fiddly to get these to sit nice and vertical, but by this stage of the build I'm used to nudging things around. That's all there is to the lower hull. Then I used green stuff to fill the gaps in the anchor well things, whatever they're called. I also filled one of the worst gaps in some of the superstructure on the starboard side. I'm not going into detail on how to use green stuff in this video because it's already long enough. For more information, check out my quick tips video on filling gaps, link in the description and in the card on screen now. As you can see, I glued the anchors into place, which is simple enough, and I think they look okay. And that's the ship complete. I built the little cradle for the ship to sit on, and I do like the name plaque that you get. It was at this point that I figured I probably wasn't going to paint this model anytime soon, and so I might as well glue all of the main segments to the hull. Otherwise, parts would end up getting lost and broken, and then the ship would never get painted. So I glued most of the parts down. The main and secondary gun turrets aren't glued down yet, nor is the upper hull glued to the lower hull, but for now, that's the model completed. This is the first ship I've built since I was a kid, unless you count gluing that awful Airfix Bismarck hull together and then giving up. While some of this build was a bit frustrating, I did enjoy building it. Some of you guys have been wanting me to build a ship for some time now, and I saw this in the hobby shop the other day fairly cheap, so I figured, why not? I'm not sure which was more frustrating about this kit. The tiny parts that were really hard to remove mold lines from without breaking them, or the various sub-assemblies that would just not stay in place without a good deal of fiddling and nudging. Of course, things could certainly be much worse than that, and the model hasn't turned out too badly, I think. In my opinion, this model is okay. I wouldn't say it's the highest quality, and if I'm honest, I don't think I've done the best job of assembling it. There are a lot of gaps, and there are probably more mold lines than I even realise. I had to leave a few of them on there because I simply couldn't remove them without damaging the part. For this reason, I would say this isn't a model for looking at closely. It's an admiring from afar model. Hopefully painting it will make it look better. It probably will. I've decided that I'm not going to paint this ship with the black and white stripes that the box art would suggest. There are decals included for the hull stripes, but painting them onto the superstructure by hand sounds miserable, and it would be next to impossible to mask for spraying. I mean, I'm sure it could be done, but I'm not going to do that. I believe Bismarck appeared without the stripes at the time of its encounter with HMS Hood, so omitting them is probably quite fine. I had initially thought this kit would be pretty quick to build, but it seems I underestimated the sheer number of tiny parts and sub-assemblies to put together. Lesson learned, I suppose. I put this together over the course of 3 evenings, which I guess is still kind of quick. Better results might be had if I took more time and worked slower and more patiently, but I guess I got excited. What can I say? I will most likely build another ship at some point. I would like to get something in a slightly larger scale, mostly to hopefully avoid the super tiny parts. Those tend to be a little bit more expensive though, so it's not something I'll be buying right away. However, if anyone has any suggestions, I would like to hear them. I would also like to hear what you think of this model. Let me know in the comments below, and if you have any questions or unrelated comments, feel free to add those too. And of course, don't forget to do things like subscribing here on YouTube and following me on social media. Check the links in the description to find me. If you really like the things I do, please consider helping to support the channel over at Patreon. Patrons get to see my videos a bit early, along with some patron-only bonus content, and of course access to the patron-only Discord channel. I shall return soon, so until then, happy modelling, and thanks for watching. Farewell.